Okay, so it's August 9th. We're here at the Culver City Democratic Club discussing the Hollywood strikes, and our first speaker is Patrick Meighan, club member and television writer. So, as they say, how'd it start and how's it going?
It started 100 days ago and it's going 100 days longer and 100 days stronger now. Um, I confess I don't necessarily have like a full sort of presentation that I have planned here. So, I guess I can just kind of give a little bit of background, and then if at some point people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, that's fine too. But yeah, my name is Patrick Meighan. I'm a member of the Culver City Democratic Club. I'm also a writer. I write for an animated sitcom called Family Guy. And as such, I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America, which means that right now I'm on strike. This is my second strike with the Writers Guild. I was around in 07, 08 when we went out on strike for, that was 100 days. So we've edged past that previous one. And so this is number two for me. And it's important, not necessarily for me personally exactly. There's with the advent of streaming, the industry has changed in ways that are designed to make TV production or filmed entertainment production as cheap as possible in certain ways by kind of throwing out previous norms. And it's part of the sort of like tech industry tradition of moving into new industries and sort of figuring out ways to sort of break them and squeeze out any sort of like loose funding that can be squeezed out and put into their pockets, and typically at the expense of the people who are working those jobs, and essentially trying to turn TV writing into gig work. And I can explain the specifics of that, but at the moment, I'll just sort of leave it at that. And when it has happened in the past to, for example, the taxi companies or independent bookstores, right? In many ways, those industries or the workers in those industries were sort of left kind of defenseless because they didn't have a strong union with a culture and a history of solidarity, like and a willingness to fight back. And in this particular case, that's what they're facing, and that's us. That's the Writers Guild of America. Everything that we have, which is to say everything that my family and I enjoy, that allows us to live a middle class or better lifestyle in Culver City, California, not a cheap place to live, is a function of the fact that previous generations of writers have struck, or at least in some cases made a credible threat of striking, but in most cases actually struck to earn those benefits. Things like our health plan, things like our pension plan, which is one of the few defined benefit pension plans sort of left in the private sector, and the Writers Guild has one. And other things like residuals, for those people who don't know what those are, they're additional payments. Am I going too long, by the way, Jeff? Should I? Okay. In 1960, the writers and the actors struck together. So Eisenhower was president at that time, just to give you a sense for how long ago that was. The president of the Screen Actors Guild was Ronald Reagan. And one of the things that came out of that strike was this thing called residuals. So when actors and when writers write something that, we do it for pay, and then, we hand it over to the studios, and they're allowed to use that thing. And if it's not very valuable to them, they use that thing that one time, or, within a limited window, and then they just sort of stop using it, and everyone goes about their business. But if they decide that this thing is very valuable and they can reuse it again and again and again, an episode of Cheers, an episode of Seinfeld, an episode of Family Guy, they have to pay us an additional fee. It's called a residual. And that's something that we didn't win because the studios were feeling kind and generous and wanted to give us that thing. It's something that we won because we went on strike for it. And when I say we, I mean the writers and the actors of 1960, and the sacrifice that they made when they won that concession after a dual strike is that they had to disavow any right to residuals on anything that had been written beforehand, right? So any episode of I Love Lucy, right, or My Three Sons or whatever, like they had to basically admit, like, yep, all right, we're not trying to get residuals on that. We just, writers going forward are going to be given this thing if they can sort of fight to keep it. And I today benefit from all of those wins. And so if I'm not willing, even at this, what, amounts to, sort of the latter half of my TV career, almost certainly, like if I'm not willing to fight to pass those benefits on, those winnings on to the next generation of writers, then I'm an asshole. If you can apologize, or if I can apologize for swearing on this Zoom. And I don't want to be an a-hole. I want to pass along what was given to me. So, and in this particular case, it's passing those benefits along in a way that is consistent with the new sort of technologies, because what the studios have done with the new streaming technologies in particular is find ways to render those wins meaningless, to essentially to eliminate residuals, to shrink the amount of time that writers even sort of exist as hired entities on staffs. And again, to basically turn what has been a career for, the better part of a century here in this town into short-term gig work, without the securities and, and the benefits that come with it. And if they succeed in that, then they do, but it's not going to be because I failed to hold the rope. So, yeah, so that is, I guess, sort of the my summary of why we are on strike and, why we continue to be on strike. Disa is asking, what about writers' rooms and their value for news writers? And that's a good question. So I'll just go ahead and hit that question right now. One of the biggest issues that we are on strike over, there's 2 or 3 very large ones, but one of them is the existence of something called a writer's room, which so many of the things that have enabled this business to work for employers and for employees are a set of kind of cultural norms that nobody kind of even bothered to assume, even bothered to think to write into any sort of contractual language. So if you were creating a show and it's called Cheers, right? It's going to be a comedy. It's going to be a bunch of jokes, people hanging out in a bar in Boston. It's just sort of understood, well, you're going to need funny writers who are going to write those shows. And there's a production process, right? When the actors are going to come in and they're going to, rehearse the scripts that have been written. And some of those jokes aren't going to work and some of the stories are not going to work. In which case you then go back to the writers who are sitting there in a room and, have continued to do so and say, hey, we need to rewrite these scripts. The story's not working. We need to rewrite this joke. It's not funny, blah, blah, blah. And there never was, anything in the contractual language between the Writers Guild and the studios. A thing said, now you need to have a writer's room and it has to exist while the show is being produced. And new writers are going to learn, the craft of writing in those writers' rooms, and younger folks are going to be able to break into the business that way. And future showrunners, future creators will have sort of learned everything that they learned this way. Like was all just kind of understood without, being written down. The way it's understood that when somebody sneezes next to you, say, oh, Gesundheit. Well, again, with streaming and with the entry of tech money comes an entry of people who are like, okay, what if we don't do that? What if, and here is what the world is now for most shows in streaming, you'll have a thing that's called a mini room, right? So instead of 9 months of employment where writers are being paid and on staff and simultaneously, in some cases, writing, scripts individually, but everybody working together on this, rewriting the scripts. They'll just hire, say, 4 writers as opposed to a staff of 15 or more. And they'll put those 4 writers in a room, this is before the show even exists. And they'll say, okay, create a show, come up with an idea for a show. Not even, they'll have the idea already, but they're like, okay, sort of create the arc of the show and what like kind of each of the episodes will be. And you have like 2 weeks to do it. And so the writers will get paid for 2 weeks of work, or 3 weeks of work, maybe 4 weeks of work. Then they come into the room and they take that work product and they say, great, thanks. Okay, you're all fired, except for one of you. You're going to be the showrunner, and you're going to have to just kind of figure out a way to make this work. And everybody else kind of will be gone. Now, in some cases, that work product may not be the actual scripts, right? So while those writers are off unemployed now, they'll say, oh, but we have good news for you. We'll let you freelance a script for less money, and you are not being paid as a writer weekly during that time. You just are getting the much smaller amount for the actual sort of script that you're getting paid. And again, the one person who's the showrunner has to sort of figure it out on the fly, which includes, by the way, after the actors get hired, right? You're in that room, in that mini room, writing, jokes and stories for a character named Sally, who hasn't been cast yet. And then Sally gets cast, and the actress who performs the role of Sally is really great, except for those things that you wrote, some of those things that you wrote for her, she kind of can't do. But there's this other stuff that she can do like amazing, right? Well, in the old world of television, you're like, great, let's rewrite all these scripts so that they sort of get to what this actress can do. Well, in this new world, not that anybody cares, but in this new world, it's like, well, tough. This actress is the one that we have, so she just is going to have to make do with the scripts that we have because all the writers are sort of gone now. So there's that. The other sort of issue for those, who care about such things, which, I do, as you can tell, I'm a white guy. And historically, unfortunately, to Hollywood's shame, the vast majority of television was written by people who look like me and portrayed characters who look like me. In this sort of like new era that we are living in, very wonderfully and happily, there are more and more stories being told about people who don't look like me and created by show creators who don't look like me and written by writers who do not look like me, all of which is wonderful. But this very sort of sad, kind of switcheroo that has been made is that just as this new crop of writers and creators are coming in, telling new sorts of stories about, people and populations that have not had stories told about them, that new crop of writers and creators are being told, we're going to pay you way less than writers used to get paid. We're going to give you way fewer opportunities, than writers in the past got. You're going to get many fewer opportunities to learn than writers in the past got. And that's just, like I said, it's like a sick prank to open up storytelling to new, previously underrepresented and still underrepresented, but more so now, or I guess less underrepresented now, the new, writers and characters, and then at the same time, sort of ghettoize those writers into, a much less remunerative economic model that makes it much less possible for those writers and those creators to live middle-class lives and to make careers out of them. So that's, I think, probably the best thing that I can say about Deese's question. Kareem is asking, what are the asks? Here, I'll tell you what are the biggest sort of sticking points. And one of them is that mini room question. So again, so many of the norms that have historically sort of been unwritten, and that lack of writing is now sort of being exploited by these sort of newer tech companies to kind of undo, the conditions that have historically existed in this model. The attempt now among writers today who are on strike is to try and get some of those things formally written into contract language. So those include things like having a minimum number of writers mandated, depending on the number of episodes that are, ordered for the series and the sort of budget level of the series, right? So if your series is, set for 10 episodes, this season, and it goes the total production budget is above a certain level, then you have to hire, say, 6 writers and have to keep them on throughout the production process and allow them to, go on the set and learn. The specifics of the number of writers versus the number of episodes, I'm not 100%, sure off on the top of my head, but that was an initial proposal from us. The studios have said, no, not only they said no, they've said, they refuse to engage on that. They're not going to make a counter offer. They're just insisting, before we can even sit down at a negotiating table with them, that we just remove that, request, that proposal from our plate entirely. Just pretend that it's not something that we want or ever asked for. So that's one big ask. Another big ask is the issue of AI. So relatively late in our sort of pattern of demands formation, ChatGPT sort of burst out into the marketplace, and writers started to worry, like, wait a second, is this something that can ultimately replace us? So we added to our pattern of demands that that studios could not use generative AI models trained on, all the scripts that we have written over the past 100 years to synthesize new scripts. And we thought that that was going to be an easy ask. The analogy that was sort of put out there by people who are in the negotiating on the negotiating committee is like if you were to ask a friend, like, hey, this is totally dumb, but let's just sort of like agree that, like, you're not going to stab me in the face. And if your friend is like, no, I'm not going to agree to that, you're suddenly very worried that, like, oh shit, what's my friend planning to do with that knife in my face? Studios are not willing to commit to refraining from training our their computers with every script that's ever been written, and potentially putting out fresh drafts of basically synthesized Drek with our work. So that's another big ask. And then the third one is residuals. So when I mentioned residuals earlier, right, the notion was that, okay, if I write a show and it's the Johnny Craphead show and nobody watches it and the studios can't like further monetize it, I don't get any residuals. And that's fine. The point of the residual is like you're reusing it, but you're not reusing that terrible show that I wrote. So fine, I'm not getting a residual. But if I write an episode of Seinfeld and you, the studios, end up re-airing it and syndicating it all everywhere and stuff, and it continues to make just millions and millions of dollars for the studio, I deserve a small part of that. Well, with streaming, the studios have instead said, so we're not going to tell you how frequently these episodes get aired. Like, we're not going to tell you which episodes of streaming content or content that is made for broadcast but then put on streaming is sort of reused. But we're just going to give you a small residual. It's a fraction of what a broadcast residual is, and we'll just call it good. And it's basically just sort of a buyout of your residual. And we have said, okay, we're ready for this to be success-based. We're ready for you to give us the data on who is watching, not even who is watching what, but just how often something is being watched, how often this other thing is not being watched, and paying us our residual accordingly. If our episode does not get watched, don't pay us a residual. If our episode does great, give us a great residual. And the studios, that's another issue that the studios have said, nope, not only are we denying that request, we're not making a counter offer. We are just demanding that you just take it straight off the table, and we're not going to bargain with you until you just basically drop that demand entirely. So those are some of the very biggest asks. And I think I probably talked way too long, so I'm going to go ahead and shut up now.
That was great. Thank you. So it looks like Senator Smallwood-Cuevas is back online. So can you hear me, Senator?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Hello.
Let me spotlight you, and Thanks for joining us. So
Thank you and for your patience with my Zoom connection. I kept getting dropped, so I'm glad to be here.
we were
And
just,
thank you for that update, Patrick.
so I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but everyone knows
That's
you're a
okay.
great champion of labor and would love to hear your thoughts on the situation with the writers and the actors.
Well, I just want to say how much the 28th district is supporting those writers and Writers Guild and Screen Actors Guild members who are on the front line, not just representing the issues that Patrick talked about and the bread and butter for those workers in that industry, but really on the front lines for all of us. You know, our district has been faced with so many crises as relates to housing insecurity, growing homelessness numbers, food insecurity, healthcare insecurity, and access to quality care, all of which boils down to how do we ensure that workers in our district, in our county, and our state earn a living wage and have the wages and benefits that they deserve and that sustain their families and by extension sustain our communities. So I've had the honor to be out there on the picket line with the writers and with the actors. And I've also had the misfortune of having these conversations about ways to ensure equity and opportunity with some of the studio leadership. And I want to say, as a legislator who supported the $1.6 billion in film tax credits, because we know so many of our community members, particularly those in Culver City and in other parts of our district, are employed by these studios. And we want to make sure that these jobs are here in the state of California and that we're not outsourcing them right to work states like Georgia. But at the same time, the commitment and the partnership is that those employers treat workers and our community members with dignity and respect. And quite frankly, I was very, very disturbed by some of the narrative that was coming out of the studios about how they were going to hold out until our community members, lost their homes. I think that is no place for our compact, our commitment as partners, business and community and government. We need to see into this strike. We need to have those employers come to the table and to have the conversation about these very important issues that are really about the future of work in this industry and how we can continue to have residents thrive in these jobs. What we don't want to do is create more low-wage, dead-end jobs that don't allow our residents to sustain themselves. That is not an acceptable option. That means as we look at technology, as we look at these new streaming opportunities, as we look at those folks above and below the line, we want to ensure that they are able to participate fully in the profits that they are bringing to this industry. So, my thoughts on this, and I'm new to the state legislature. We worked hard to win a seat and to put someone in Sacramento that comes from union organizing, that comes from community organizing, that comes from building pathways for our most marginalized workers to have access to good careers that they can sustain themselves and their families. And so, my position, being the representative for the 28th who ran on that message and that platform, and that the voters overwhelmingly support, we stand, with the workers. And, I think one of the things that we need to focus on, Patrick, is how can we have a hearing here in the district that brings some of these challenges to light that involves and educates more of our constituents. I'm so proud of the Culver City Democratic Party for members for putting this conversation together and educating our community. I think we all are drawing the line on bad jobs that don't allow 28th district residents to stay in the 28th district and to support themselves and to support their families. And we've got to all come to some agreement on how we do that. And your union, as I mentioned, is been in this struggle and in this fight for some time now. And it is critically important that we all get involved in having our voices be heard on this. We also have the hotel workers that are out on strike. We have the Starbucks workers who are still working to organize. We just had a one-day strike in the city of Los Angeles. So it is a hot labor summer, a hot union summer. And so let's come together and figure out how we bring more of our voices to bear on this critical issue. And I see that there are questions in the chat. Let me see if I can see them, or someone wants to let me know what they are. I'm happy to answer them.
Max, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sorry about that. Had a bit of trouble. Hi. Also, nice to meet everyone. I'm Maxwell. I'm a new member of the club, Maxwell Yulin. I'm also, funny enough, an incoming staff attorney for Unite Here Local 11. So this is a very relevant conversation, the hotel union that's on strike. And my question for you, Senator, and I would turn on my video, but I'm driving. My question has to do with what legislation is being debated in light of these strikes to strengthen worker power, both in this strike and in future actions. California has unionization rate is around 16%, which is higher than the nation, but still really not very good. And there's a lot of limitations on what you can do for labor law, but there are things that because of federal law, but there are things you can do at the edges. And so my question had to do with is in particular, the question of AI, and also about things like unemployment insurance, for example, which in California, you're not able to access unemployment insurance if they're in the event of a labor dispute. So I was curious to hear your thoughts on that and what's been being talked about.
Well, I appreciate that question. And I want to say the Laguna Cliffs, we were part of an action of sending a letter that had over 24 senators and assembly members to that Marriott to make sure that they did the right thing and are continuing to engage and put pressure on UC Regents to be responsive in that fight and in that struggle. And I'm so glad to hear that the Westin Bonaventure, did the right thing. Huge part of the hotel network here, and we want to see more hotels do that. I mean, your question is so important, and I want to say there are a number of things that we need to do together. In the area of AI, when we talk about the future of work, I don't think we've talked enough about the impact of the future of work on the existing workforce, and whether that's the grocery store sector, whether it's in Longshore, whether it's in the writers, television and film writers industry. We've got to recognize that part of the way that this system has worked in terms of public and private partnerships is that there's a commitment to job creation. And in more recent history, coming out of the deunionization and deregulation, to ensure that these are good jobs where workers have voice and where they have some say so and power over their wages and working conditions. So, you think about living wage push efforts, you think about fight for the 15, right? These are all things that have happened in recent history, but we've done that because part of the consumer government and worker compact is that we will create jobs out of investing in business, and those jobs will support our communities. Now, if we're removing the commitment to employ and create good jobs and replacing them with machines, then we need to think about the human asset tax or fee that needs to be associated with that, because it is critically important that we all understand that our state budget is based on things like income tax, and it's based on things like the sales tax that we utilize in LA County, for example, which basically funds our transit system. So the role that the worker plays is not simply getting a paycheck and consuming goods. It's also the deepest, the worker is the deepest investor in this democracy we call the state of California. So I think we need to be very mindful and of the impact of AI, and we need to figure out ways to ensure that employers are paying in to the human assets that we need them to pay into our community. So, I think the point that the Writers Guild members are making about the ways in which and Screen Actors Guild are making, and the ways in which AI can use their human capital and multiply it and gain profits off of that, but not pay the actual workers is inexcusable and unacceptable. And that's where we need to look at the human asset tax that needs to be levied when we move things like artificial intelligence that is actually replacing a main investor in our democracy. I think the other things that we are doing and we continue to do, I am fighting right now for a bill to protect workers against retaliation when they file a labor complaint in the workplace, whether it's wage and hour or discrimination or equal pay. How do we stop employers from retaliating? I'm also, pushing for a bill to make sure that grocery store workers who have been in very similar experiences of having to go on strike to protect their wages, that when this large merger happens that was just approved by the courts between Kroger and Albertsons, that those workers get the right to be transferred to continue to work, but also that they have a severance so that they can weather this financial storm. And I agree, we need to strengthen our unemployment system. It's not enough, and too many workers are not covered when they need investment the most. And, I am in support. There is a referendum that is going to be on the ballot in the near future where we put the question of the right to organize on the ballot. Unions represent every collection of stakeholders that exists, whether it's in banking, when you look at credit unions, for example, right? Institutions that have stakeholder groups that have some say so and authority over the ways in which business is done that affects their bottom line. And certainly every worker in the state of California should have access to a union and to be able to organize without retaliation. But we know at the end of the day what this is about. This is about fear of worker power. It's about workers being able to stop production and to demand what is rightfully theirs. And so it's been part of what folks have called the greatest generation. That's when over nearly 40% of all workers had union voice. And that was one of the richest and largest growth spurts that our our country had ever seen. And so I think California is on the right track by ensuring that we protect the right to organize, we protect workers who are organizing, and we protect workers in the workplace. Because when workers do well, our communities do well. And we know when workers do well, business also does well. Raising to the 15, every fast food restaurant claimed they were going to be closed down within a year. Here we are, almost 5 years later, and business continues to move forward. So we know that ensuring that workers are strong makes our democracy stronger, and it certainly makes our economy thrive.
Thank you, Senator. Danny Young.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for visiting us tonight. I'm sorry I had to join a little bit late. So I'm not sure of everything that's been discussed already, but I did hear you mention the entertainment tax credit that we have here in California. So I'm a animator in the visual effects industry. And I can say that this tax incentive around the world has completely obliterated the industry here. If you want to talk about good jobs that were based in LA, I live in LA because I came here to work in this industry. And a couple of years after I got here, Canada, in Vancouver in particular, but it's recently expanded, they offer 60% rebates on labor for my industry. And companies that I work for shut down. Sony Pictures Entertainment right here, Sony Picture Animation, they just opened up shop in Vancouver, and something like 700 out of 1,000 people ended up having to move to Vancouver. I mean, it's just been it's completely ruined the industry here. And I don't think that the state can effectively compete, especially on the provincial level in Canada or in England or in New Zealand or Australia. And it's frustrating because at the end of the day, it's basically a gift to the corporations who are, the big entertainment corporations are pitting municipalities against each other all over the world. And so, I appreciate that there's an attempt to try to keep it here, but it's sort of it's just it's a sort of bending the knee to give them more money to keep the work here that was already here in the first place. And so years ago, there was discussion of countervailing duties. I know it's sort of a legal, esoteric thing, but the idea being that we would, if you were getting some subsidy overseas, you would have to pay that back when you bring the money back home. And there was a lot of movement for it, but it kind of fell off because we didn't have any legislative support. I'm just wondering if you're familiar with that. If you have any thoughts on this in general, if you'd be willing to talk about it more in detail later, but sorry, but I know that anyway, it's just it's been an existential nightmare for my industry here. So yeah, that's it.
No, I appreciate that. And you're right. I mean, we're chasing bad, right? Basically, I mean, that we would even be in competition with a state like Georgia, and that we would have to then invest in an industry to make sure that this industry that we gave birth to as a state of California, that we have all invested in one way or another, now we have to do more to keep those jobs here. I'm definitely open to learning more. I want to get more information on some of these different models that you have seen where there can be more accountability, because quite frankly, a number of us in the Legislative Black Caucus, a day before the writers, the Screen Actors announced their strike, we held a press conference, the Demand Diversity press conference, because it was really challenging to support the tax credits, knowing that we still have a long way to go above and below the line in terms of representative workforce in this film industry. And one of the things that the studios were made very clear is how much of a priority diversity was, how much progress they had made, the types of leadership that they have that were moving the ball forward. They produced a report to show us the levels of diversity in terms of hiring in the industry. And, we, maybe a week or so later, we, at the state capitol, approved that policy. And then not even a week after the policy was approved, they began laying off all of the diversity and equity and inclusion leaders. I think there are up to 10 DEI leaders across the studios. And those are the, high profile roles. That's not the folks who are below the line. That's not the folks, who are, not in the C-suites, but on the administrative staff for those DEI departments. But we knew not even a week later, they had basically erased, and largely Black women, from those positions. So the timing was suspect. It came just as, the SAG-AFTRA strike was announced. So to me, there's a lot of challenges with this industry that, and as you say, really needs an expanded support and investment to ensure that California can remain competitive in this industry. But if the ways in which they are treating their employees and the way that they have closed and shuttered these DEI efforts is an example of their commitment to California values and what we hold dear, then we have a long way to go to ensure that we continue this partnership of investing in this industry. So, there have been calls for holding the 1.6 billion until the issues related to the strike get addressed. We certainly want to look at a trailer bill, a policy to reform and strengthen the film tax credit policy so that it can be more worker-centered and there can be accountability in terms of the decisions that are made at the executive level by the studios in terms of the workforce. We want to see this industry grow into the future. And we know this is the home of where that growth and innovation can happen. And we know California is the 4th largest economy in the world. If we need to sustain that industry, it can be sustained, but it has to be sustained in the values that we care about. And that is, we care about our workers and we care about diversity because people of color are the majority in the state and we want to see a representative industry. So these are, some of the concerns that were in discussions, quite frankly, that happened around the film tax credits. And I think we have more work to do to ensure that we are supporting an industry that is doing all that it can to support Californians.
Thank you, Senator. Cynthia Hart.
Yes, please tell me more about this. I thought I understood you to say that there's hope to have a right to organize bill on the California ballot. I know that the PRO Act in Congress, they're still bravely, they reintroduce it every year, but maybe we could get it in California. What is its path to the ballot and where can I go to sign the ballot petition?
We're not there yet, but its path is in. There is a committee and it is moving forward to getting launched publicly to be able to have the signatures necessary for us to get it on the ballot. So I know we're still working through because we want it to be successful. We want to also make sure that everything that we can do to strengthen and clean up our referendum process happens first. And then we want to move forward with putting that out to California voters because we think the voters understand how critically important it is in the state of California for workers to have a living wage that keeps pace with housing, food, transportation costs. So I think it's coming to a committee member meeting near you very soon, and our staff will definitely keep you abreast on the timeline.
Thank you, Senator. So with the few, and thank you for being so generous with your time to join us tonight and detail about these very important issues. So with the few minutes we have left, I'd like to put on Pete Rockwell. We know Pete as our past president and our newsletter editor, but he's also a working actor, and I would, if he can get on to give that perspective, love to hear from him.
So he's on Cynthia's camera. You can spotlight.
Oh.
You're still
Yeah.
muted. Pete.
I
Oh, there we
just-
go.
There you are.
I just unmuted myself. And I don't really have a lot to add to what Patrick said, except we put in the chat three, at 7:39, we put in the chat three links. One is to the SAG-AFTRA strike website. The second link is to the issues in negotiations that are still outstanding. There's a thing that's very similar to what we published in the newsletter that came out on the 1st of the month that has all of the Screen Actors Guild AFTRA issues that are the major ones, at least, and what one side is asking for and what the other side is asking for. And there is another thing I wanted to mention. Well, the last link that we put in there is for the picket schedule. So you can check and see where the pickets are and what time they're there. And they're very friendly people, and go picket for half an hour or as long as you can. Wear your Culver City Democratic Club t-shirt if you want. That's what I did when I've been to picket so far. I've always had the t-shirt, and they're happy to see that because it tells them that there's a local political organization that's backing them, or at least one or more members of that organization.
And take a picture.
Yeah, there's one of me in the newsletter, actually, with the t-shirt on. The one that came out on the 1st. The other thing I wanted to just say is that what's different about this strike. I've had a number of jobs over the years with different unions, and I've been a member of different unions. And this is really the first time I've ever been on strike where we shut the place down. In the grocery industry, they just get people to keep the store open, and they hope that, and the union tries to get the customers not to go to that particular store, and they purposely leave other stores open so that people do have a place to get their food. And it's a whole different dynamic. They have to put different kinds of pressure on the companies, but this is very direct to the way it was in the days of manufacturing plants when they just couldn't get 7,000 workers to open the auto plant, and they had to shut it down in some cases. And that's what's happening with these big producing companies. They're not putting out any, they're not making any movies or television episodes right now. Not sure why this light is so weird. One of the things that's changed since the last strike we had with the actors and the writers together, which was 1960, like Patrick said, is some of the biggest companies in the industry right now: Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Sony. They all started out doing something other than making movies and TV, and now that's just a part of their business. It used to be, 50 years ago, if the unions went out on strike against these big companies, that was the company's only business. They made content for movies and TV. Now it's a new world. The issues, the two big issues in the writers' situation are, I think, in my opinion, the same as the two biggest issues in the actors: the residuals and artificial intelligence. With actors, it's using technology instead of extras, instead of background actors. They can create extras out of thin air if they can have and they want to do it without giving the actors who they're basing the whole thing on any cut of the money that they make from the thing. So it's a similar type of thing. Yeah, I just wanted to, the other thing I wanted to mention is there is a thing called interim agreements where actors can go to work for independent films if they sign a contract that agrees to what we're asking the major companies for. So it's the contract we're trying to get Amazon and Apple and Netflix and Sony and the rest of them to agree to. And if a little independent production company wants to make a movie, they can do it if they agree to those terms. And it's allowing the actors to work and make some money while this thing's going on, and it might drag on for a while. And it's also providing a little pressure on the companies that somebody else is still out there making product in this country. And it's, people are keeping up their skills too. So that's something that's going on that people have had some confusion about. Some actors were thinking that there was something wrong with going to work under that agreement, and they were calling it a waiver. But it's not a waiver, it's the new contract that we want. A waiver is something completely different. And in this letter from Fran Drescher that I just got in the email today, she talks a lot about this, that this is exactly the opposite of a waiver, because what they're doing is agreeing to what the union's asking for. Anyway, that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but maybe Patrick or I could. But I do encourage people to go picket. It's a friendly situation. If you're holding a sign, the other people holding signs are friendly. Anyway.
Thank you, Pete. I see Kareem has a question, so please go ahead.
Yes, I'm not part of any unions, but how can I help you? Can I show up simply at the picket line and just hold a sign?
That's one. Yes, you can. That's what I'm encouraging people to do. And that's why I put the link, and I'll ask Cynthia when I get off her computer here to cut and paste those links in the chat. Again, the last one is the strike picketing schedule. So they'll tell you where and when, where they are and what hours. There's a couple of big ones in Culver City. There's right in front of Sony, or all around Sony, actually. They have different entrances. And they have Amazon, which is downtown Culver City, the old Culver City studios. So I'm going to go back to my phone now. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have about 2 minutes left. If are no more questions for our panelists, then I just want to say again, thank you to Senator Smallwood-Cuevas and Patrick Meighan and Pete Rockwell for showing up tonight and sharing your insight and experience and getting the club up to speed.
Can I be rude and say something? Senator, I hope that if you can find time in your schedule to visit our booth at Fiesta La Bayona. I've been in touch with your staff, but I just thought I'd put in a plug now.
Okay, I'll stop by for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Senator. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you all again, and we'll get into the business meeting in a moment.